Okay, we are going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to discuss the next generation classroom with the hybrid learning platform, including Microtech's virtual training room, as well as cloud-based labs and Microtech's virtual training labs, and how these can really benefit your training program. Today's webinar is brought to you by Microtech. For those of you who don't know, Microtech is a global leader in training delivery solutions, including training facilities, hybrid learning delivery, and training logistics management. You can learn more about our complete line of training delivery services at mclabs.com, or also feel free to contact me at rebeccao@mclabs.com, and I'll be happy to provide any additional information. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. We are going to have a couple of Q&A sessions, so feel free to submit any questions in the chat panel throughout the program. We'll answer as many of these as possible in our brief time today. If there are any that we are unable to answer in our time today, those will be emailed to you. Today's webinar will be recorded and archived on mclabs.com. You will receive an email with a link to that, as well as a brief evaluation survey. If you could take a few moments to let us know what you think about our program today, our presenters, and anything you'd like to see in future webinars. My name is Rebecca Osterman. I'll be your host today. Joining me today is Matt Linden. Matt works closely with Microtech's customers to provide complete training delivery services. That would include training room rentals as well as our virtual training services of virtual training rooms and virtual training labs. I know Matt is really looking forward to sharing valuable information with you today on how you can use the next generation classroom to help with your training programs. Just to give you an overview of what we will be discussing, we're going to go over what the next generation classroom is, then discuss hybrid learning, the benefits of that, and what makes Microtech's hybrid learning platform or virtual training room different. We'll have a brief question and answer period. Then we'll go into cloud-based or virtual labs, as well as Microtech's virtual lab solution, and another Q&A session. Would like to start out today with a brief poll. If you could let us know, what type of training do you provide? Do you provide technical or lab-based training, soft skills training, or other? If you do have other, feel free to mark that in the chat feature. And we'll give you just a few more seconds here. It looks like most everybody has voted. Okay, it looks like about 2/3 of you provide technical or lab-based training, another 23% soft skills training, and 50% provide other. Very interesting with those results, and I hope that today's program will help all of you no matter what kind of training you do provide. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who is going to go over what the next generation classroom is. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you everyone for taking some time to join us today for our little Lunch and Learn webinar here. I also hope you guys find this beneficial and learn something from us today. For those of you that might not be familiar with Microtech fully, we have traditionally been providers of on-demand classroom and computer lab space, which is most often used to support training programs. Now that said, we kind of noticed a bit of a need over the past couple of years to make training more accessible to students, both for public training as well as internal employee training. So along with the market, we've kind of combined a couple of different solutions, which include physical classrooms, virtual classrooms, as well as an option to incorporate a virtual lab environment, which makes a bit more of a flexible model for your instructor-led training. Now, for the rest of our call here, I'm going to focus a bit upon defining what we refer to as a hybrid learning environment, talk a bit about what a virtual lab is, and then we'll discuss how you can leverage these two solutions to really benefit your training initiatives. So let's start first with talking a bit about hybrid learning, or what we refer to as hybrid learning. Now, when most of us hear the term hybrid, we think of essentially combining two different things to create something new and improved. Same would apply for this situation. So what we've basically done is incorporate collaborative video conferencing technology into a physical classroom which allows remote students to join live instructor-led training events. Really, well, by combining the benefits of an in-person training with the convenience of remote learning, you're basically getting, you're creating sort of a best of both worlds scenario. I really think the best way to really explain this would be to show you guys. So here's an actual photograph of one of our classrooms that's incorporating what our version of hybrid learning. As you can see here, there's an instructor in front of a classroom full of students. They're obviously taking some sort of technical training because they all have computers available. But in the back of the room, there's an additional couple of monitors there, and you can see actual video feed of remote students joining that training event. So really what this does is it makes up an additional back row in the room that allows those students to participate just as the students are in the class. Now, in terms of sort of some of the benefits here, I'm going to start first on just focusing on the learning benefits. Because this is a bit more of an immersive solution versus maybe like your webinar format, kind of like what we're on today. I'm not sure if, because you guys are joining us, I'm sure you've probably attended other webinars that may have been a bit longer in scope. Sometimes a lot of companies will deliver like full day training using that type of a format, which of course you get the benefit of not traveling. But it's not quite as involving as what we're referring to here when we talk about hybrid. Really what this does is it changes the dynamic of that experience for the student. The two-way video requires them to be a lot more involved in the training. And it holds them more accountable to the instructor to make sure they're paying attention, which eventually leads to them learning more and getting more out of that training. They do feel a lot more engaged, and they're able to contribute in the discussions just like the students in the classroom are able to do.
So you're saying that in this model, the remote learners are not able to just hear the class, but actually interact with the instructor and the other students?
Right, yeah, so that's exactly, I guess, sort of the benefit here. So, I mean, for example, we've actually seen students in some of our classrooms, whenever the instructor might be taking a break, we've seen them go to the back of the room and walk up to the monitor and actually communicate directly with the students remotely, sort of like an ad hoc networking session. I mean, what this does is it makes those people that are remote feel a bit more like they're involved, and it makes the people that are in the classroom feel like they're taking part of sort of like a more of advanced type of training. We've also seen some additional, some improvement on test or satisfaction scores, which we work with our clients to manage, which has shown that both the remote students and the people that are attending training in some of our classrooms are actually scoring their surveys a bit higher than average. Now, I did want to talk a bit about how this benefits the instructors as well. There are some ways that they can kind of leverage this to help them with delivering training. We've also, I mentioned some of the satisfaction scores. Microtech focuses a lot on the instructors that use our classrooms. We see them as sort of the feet on the ground, and making them happy helps make sure that their training is delivered successfully. We've seen a great improvement in feedback from them as well. For people that are using this type of a model, they really like the way that we sort of leveraged it to make training easy for them to deliver to remote students. Because they're in a classroom and they're actually with students in the environment that they're teaching in, leveraging this solution really does help them. It encourages them to use their natural teaching style versus delivering strictly to remote students. Now, depending on the platform you're using for this, it can be very adaptable to the way that they teach with some very minor adjustments. But really the biggest benefit is that by having those students on video at all times, it gives the instructor the ability to pick up on like nonverbal cues that they might be displaying. For example, if they look confused, you can see on their face that they're confused. So you can stop and ask questions to see if there are, or ask if there are any questions to kind of clarify a point. Also, just as a student in the class can raise their hand to ask a question, people that are on video can literally raise their hand and the instructor can see them doing that, and they can pause to address their question. Now, in terms of like the business case for this, I did want to touch a bit upon how this would affect you as a training organization, your bottom lines, because my guess is that's the reason why you're joining us. But in any case, so for those of you that might be focused more on public training or selling seats for your training courses, what this does is it essentially removes the walls and helps open up your registration. If you think about it, by allowing people that aren't located geographically to your training event to join your training and still get the same experience, it really does help you increase the number of seats you're selling, which we've also seen helps decrease the number of classes you have to cancel due to low enrollment. Now, for those of you that might be more focused on like in-house training or employee training, just think about the types of costs you could save on with utilizing this. This includes less travel, less hotel rooms, fewer meals, and the other big benefit is time out of the office. If your employees are able to attend training remotely versus having to travel to a city, think about how much time that's saving them in terms of like travel time, like overnight time, maybe leaving on a weekend. This allows them to sort of like focus, like go to training, get that training delivered to them and learn, and then get right back to work. Now, these same benefits also apply to your instructors. More and more these days, it's becoming more difficult for training organizations to find really reliable, like effective instructors, especially when your training is more technical in nature. Now, what this does for instructors is it gives them those same benefits. They can deliver training to more students in a shorter time frame and reduce their travel as well, which again keeps them in the office more, allows them to focus on other types of tasks like developing your training curriculum as opposed to traveling from one city to the next.
Okay, great, Matt. We are getting close to our first Q&A period, so if everybody would like to, if you have any questions, be sure to enter those into the chat panel. While you're entering those, I know Matt would like to go over a little bit about what the benefits of Microtech's specific hybrid learning environment is with the virtual training room.
Absolutely. So for those of you that might be new to this type of a solution and might be looking for someone to help partner with to leverage this, I did want to touch a bit about on our virtual training room solution, which we refer to as VTR. What we've done is we've invested in some state-of-the-art equipment, which we're able to implement in our classrooms, which are available to rent. This includes cameras, microphones, monitors, and some additional tools that we've incorporated for the instructors to help them relay information. What this means for you as a training company, though, is that this requires no capital expenditures. You don't have to invest in equipment. You don't have to sign long-term contracts. It's available in the same on-demand model as our classrooms. The other thing I wanted to touch on is that this means that you're not required to dedicate additional resources to managing that equipment. You don't have to have someone scheduling these online environments, just like you would have to have scheduling classrooms. We also provide total support prior to, during, and after all of your training events. This includes a walkthrough for instructors to help get them acclimated to the technology so that they're comfortable with it before they have to use it to teach. All of our facilities also have on-site staff that are there to help support the technology. In case something goes wrong, they're able to walk in and help the instructor. The other really big benefit is that we also provide live support for your students that are joining remotely. Now, instructors in particular love this because what that means for them is that they don't have to focus on supporting the technology and answering problems. That's all taken care of for them so they can focus on teaching.
All right, great. Thank you, Matt. We do have some questions that have come in. We have Paul asking, I charge per person for training. How do I ensure that only one person is receiving the remote training? Is it possible for many people to sit at one computer and receive the training?
So this is a great question that we get all the time, actually. But if you think about it, by having them on camera, if there's 3 or 4 people sitting at the computer, you're gonna be able to see all those students sitting there. So that is also one of the benefits of having them like being accountable visually. Now, of course, there are other ways that they can get around that. I mean, you can have people sitting off camera, but and there are some additional ways that you can kind of address those issues. But that's something that could probably be talked to more specifically outside of this.
Okay, great. We have Scott asked, and you touched on this a little bit, I know, Matt, but Scott asks, how do you handle technical problems with the remote students during the class?
Sure. So what we do is there's actually a live number that your remote students are able to call to talk to a person. And that person will help them troubleshoot their issues to try and get connected. Now, obviously, they can't handle like problems with their internet service. That's something that they would have to make sure they have in advance. But anything related specifically to the platform, our live support is able to help them with.
Okay, great. And then we have Shelley asking, how many students can a classroom accommodate?
So that's another question we get quite a bit. The tendency here is, especially for people selling training, is to try and sell as many possible seats as you can to try and maximize, obviously, the profitability of those courses. The one thing that we suggest, just based on our experience and what we've seen take place, you still want to try and focus your, or sort of shape your classes maximum seating capacity to what you would normally teach to. Again, the tendency is to sell more seats, but if you're sitting in imagine yourself sitting in a 100-person classroom versus sitting in a 20-person classroom. When you're in that large seminar room, there's not as much interaction with the instructor. Not as many people can ask questions. You just don't feel as involved as you would in that smaller classroom environment. So if your curriculum is designed to deliver to 20 people, you should really try and keep your maximum number of both a combination of on-site and remote students to that 20. Now that said, if you are looking to just maximize seats, really, I think the most you can see on screen using our particular platform is about 25 people, but you can actually have hundreds joining in more of like a traditional webinar format, kind of like this. To be honest, that answer really depends on the platform you're using, but those answers I gave are really more specific to our platform.
Okay, great, Matt. We have room for one more question in this section. When the instructors are adopting the hybrid system, have you seen a dip in trainer effectiveness before they reach the same level as if they were in the physical classroom?
So again, this kind of depends on the platform you're using, but what we see, and a number of our clients that have sort of like spread this out to multiple instructors. I mean, you do see some that sort of have trouble at first, but the point of the platform we've chosen to use for this is that it's very user friendly and it's very easy to adapt. And to be honest, we've actually seen higher scores on those classes over a short period of time. It really just takes some minor tweaks to the way they deliver their training in order to incorporate these solutions. And once they start using it for the first day, like they're used to it after a couple hours, and then they're ready to go for the remainder of that day and for multiple days. So, so really, I guess the short answer to that would be not really. I mean, it doesn't really affect the way that they deliver training. If anything, it makes it easier for them to deliver information.
Okay, great, Matt. Those were some great questions. Thank you, everybody. We were able to get to all of them, but I will also be sending out an email that has the answers to those questions as well. Moving right along, we are going to discuss virtual labs now. Matt, would you like to start out with telling us what a virtual lab is?
Sure. So, when we refer to a virtual lab, basically what you're getting here is it's a computer that's located in the cloud. Now, this technology was originally developed for actual software developers, and they use this to test code in a safe environment outside of their IT infrastructure. Now, over the last couple of years, though, similar to like the hybrid learning, the training industry has sort of seen an advantage here to utilizing this platform for training purposes. So really what you're getting here is a way for your students to access software in lab environments in the cloud through any internet connection available to them. All they really need on their computers locally is a web browser. You can also replicate any sort of physical computing requirements utilizing this platform, from a basic single PC with a single operating system to much more complex network environments. Now, in terms of when you might actually want to use this for training, there are, I mean, really any software training that you're offering where students need access to a lab can leverage this type of a solution. But a few that I want to focus on specifically, going back to what we were talking about earlier with the hybrid learning, where you're having remote students join your training, what utilizing this platform allows you to do is those students can access the same exact environment that the students that are on site are accessing. You're able to create that environment in advance and make sure that they have everything they need for training installed, and avoid any sort of problems that might come from having them install things on their own. Now, this also does apply to on-site training in a couple of different scenarios. Like a lot of our customers, for example, I mean, in addition to using our classrooms, they'll deliver training either in-house, or they might deliver training at partner venues or at clients' facilities, or maybe some third-party outside venue. What all these scenarios have in common is that there is some prior advanced setup that needs to take place to make sure that any PCs that are being used are set up properly for the training. Same goes if you're having your students bring their own devices, which even complicates the issue more, because you need to make sure that every student that's bringing their own laptop has all that stuff installed prior, and that they have all the files they need, to avoid having the instructor work on that before the first day of training. Now, utilizing a virtual lab for that, what you're doing is completely removing the need to set up any of those PCs in advance. Once the environments are created in the cloud, again, all your students need is an internet connection, and you provide them a link to access their lab environment, and that lab is ready to go on the first day. Now, in terms of other possible scenarios, I kind of mentioned complex network environments before. Some of our clients are delivering much more like technical-based training where they're maybe simulating attacks on a server, and they need to have an environment that replicates an actual internal IT infrastructure. This might include servers, switches, multiple machines, or even multiple VMs for every student. Now, you can actually take that same setup and replicate that in the cloud, which again, what that does is it requires less infrastructure. If you're doing on-site training, you don't have to ship equipment from one facility to another, and you don't have to manage additional VMs for every student. All that's taken care of in the cloud. Now, finally, I kind of referenced this before when I talked about the origin of virtual labs, but it is a safe environment for your training. So if you're training on a software that's in production currently, but you don't want your students to be accessing that production environment to make potential changes to settings that might cause serious issues or break something, you can simulate that in this lab environment, give them access to it, and let them mess with it without having a risk to your actual infrastructure.
Okay, great. So it really sounds like a virtual lab provides a consistent, safe learning environment. I know you also had some other advantages that you wanted to discuss as well.
Yes, I did. So, so again, in addition to the sort of like the learning advantages of this, there are some significant advantages to you as a business. Really, the biggest one, though, that you're going to see from this is that it frees up resources in a number of ways. So, first off, what that means is that by hosting these labs in the cloud in an offsite facility or an offsite server, that means you don't have to have internal server resources to manage. And that also means less IT tech time managing those resources. I also touched on the sort of eliminating the need for a hardware setup. Again, because all that setup is done in advance, that takes less time for a tech to go in and install setups on every PC in a classroom. It also means less time for your instructors focusing on prep and more time on instruction and developing of materials. And again, because these environments are web-based, every student is getting access to the same identical lab, meaning that when they're coming to training, they're ready to go. There is no time spent on updating software or making sure they have the right versions or making sure they have all the right files that they'll need to complete the modules of your training. The other thing I wanted to touch on that I wanted to make sure that was clear is that this also gives your instructor some additional oversight and control of the students that are accessing the labs. So for example, in a classroom, your instructor is able to walk around, look over the shoulder of every student and make sure that they're staying on pace for exercises that they might not have any questions. If they're having trouble, they can grab the mouse and they can help them. Now, if you're delivering training to remote students, that ability to do that is kind of gone. So what this does with a lab environment, it actually gives the instructor the ability to watch every remote student's lab, and they can even take control of their labs, very similar to like a remote desktop application, and actually control the mouse, control the keyboard, and help them if they're stuck on certain parts of the training.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We are getting close to the Q&A period. So again, if you do have any questions, please enter those into the chat panel when you get a moment. While we're doing that, I know there are a lot of different lab providers out there. Matt, could you give us just an overview of what makes Microtek's lab service different?
Absolutely. So, so there are a number of this type of a service on the market. I mean, there are several companies that offer virtual labs, both for training and for just general use. Now again, these aren't all designed specifically for training. Some of them, and even those that are, still require a certain level of internal resources to manage the setup of your virtual environments, to managing the scheduling of those labs, and then also to support those labs. Now, when you work with a company like Microtech and you leverage our solution, our virtual support team essentially acts as an extension of your training department. What this means for you as a business is that you get to work with a single point of contact that manages the setup of your environments, manages all the scheduling of your labs to make sure they're ready to go for your training events. And we also, very similar to our virtual training room solution, we provide end-to-end support for your instructors and your students. So again, if they're having trouble accessing in advance, we help them troubleshoot their setups. We also offer that live support while training is taking place. We also offer some follow-up support after your events are over. But really the bottom line of this is, I guess what I'm getting to is that when you work with Microtech, I mean, we have 25 years of experience in the training industry. We know what it takes to deliver successful training, and that also translates to these new advanced technologies when you're using them to deliver successful training events.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We do have a few questions related to the virtual training labs. We have Jennifer asked, do students have access to labs outside of class?
Okay, so there's actually two answers to that. I'm not quite sure what the question is, but so first off, yes, I guess if the question is, can they access it outside the classroom? Certainly. All they need to have, I mean, they can access these labs from anywhere as long as they have an internet connection and they have a browser installed on their PC. Because the software is actually HTML5 based, so they don't have to have anything installed in advance in their computers in order to use it. Now, the other way that question could be looked at is after class access. So so a lot of times students will want to actually have access to their labs once after a training takes place. Now, this depends on the solution you're using. I referenced before that there are multiple services on the market. I can really only speak to ours specifically. The way that we've sort of arranged this is that whenever you're using the virtual lab service to support a training event, your students do get access to that lab for up to 2 weeks after that training takes place. Now, the one thing you have to be careful of with other options out there, many services will basically charge by the hour that you're accessing these labs, and that hour is charged no matter who is accessing them. So if you have a student that's logging into a lab for multiple hours after a training event, you're getting charged for every minute they're in there. So that's one thing I just want to caution everyone to be careful of when they're reviewing options out there, especially if post-class access is important for your students.
Okay, great, Matt. The other question we have Sarah asks, how does the instructor communicate with remote learners?
So in terms of delivering content and actually speaking directly with remote learners, most lab services don't offer that sort of communication tool built in. Really what you would have to do is leverage something like the virtual training room solution we talked about in the beginning. So essentially what you'll need to do is have some sort of communication tool in conjunction with the lab service. And that could be anything from like teleconferencing, if really all that's important is relaying verbal information. You can use any sort of video conferencing platform, webinar platform, if delivering visual information is important. But really what you're needing to do is combine the two solutions to really create what we call like the hybrid learning environment.
Okay, we're getting close to the end of our time today. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Thank you again, Matt. If you do want to learn more and experience how Next Generation Classroom with Virtual Training Room and Virtual Training Lab can really help your training program, we're happy to give you a personalized demo to really drill down into your particular needs. You can contact Microtech at rebecca.o@mclabs.com, and I will be happy to help you set that demo up or provide any additional information that you might need for that. Thanks again, Matt. Thank you, everybody. Please do take some time to fill out the brief survey. Let us know what we did well, what we could do better, and what you would like to see in future webinars. Thank you for your time, everybody, and have a great holiday.
Okay, thanks, everyone.